Leading Ideas Talks podcast is brought to you by the Lewis Center for Church Leadership of Wesley Theological Seminary in Washington, D.C. Subscribe free to our weekly e-newsletter, Leading Ideas, at churchleadership.com/leadingideas. Leading Ideas Talks is also brought to you by Discovering God's Future for Your Church. This turnkey video toolkit helps your congregation discern and implement God's vision for your church's next faithful steps. Learn more and watch an introductory video at churchleadership.com/vision. And remember, to stay up to date with the latest church leadership strategies and information, please like and subscribe to this channel and click the bell icon to get updates for new videos. What does the future of church leadership look like? In this episode, new Lewis Center Director Jonathan Page joins Wesley Theological Seminary President David McAllister Wilson and Dean Carla Works for an engaging conversation on leading with creativity, collaboration, and purpose. Together, they explore how the church can move beyond old models, embrace change, and follow the Spirit into new possibilities for ministry.
Well, hey there. Welcome to another episode of Leading Ideas Talks. And I'm saying welcome to another. This is my first. My name is Jonathan Page. I'm the new director of the Lewis Center for Church Leadership at Wesley Theological Seminary. And today I am hosting and kind of the guest all at once. We're doing a podcast today to introduce me, and we thought it'd be a great idea to have two great leaders from Wesley to be a part of this. And so we're going to actually just have a conversation together about church leadership, a little bit about me, a little bit about each other. But it's my pleasure to welcome President David McAllister Wilson and Dean Carla Works from Wesley Theological Seminary. And they are going to join us as we engage this conversation today. So welcome, y'all.
Thank you. It's good to talk to you.
Yeah. It's good to be here at Wesley. Thank you all for your welcome to me. And before we talk about me, I'd really like to talk to the two of you. And you are leaders in theological education and living in this seminary environment. I wonder how you might describe from your seats the state of church leadership today. And maybe Carla, I'd start with you as the dean, just kind of from your perspective. What do you see emerging in church leadership from a seminary perspective?
Sure, that's a great question because the church is changing and seminaries should be changing too. So we're seeing more and more leaders in churches who may not be stopping everything in their lives to attend seminary or go get an MDiv, but feeling God's call. So how can the seminary respond in the state in which we are in? Wesley Seminary has been producing resources for a variety of different callings, including trying to equip those who feel called to ministry, and maybe they're going to be leaders of a parish. Maybe they're trying to be more faithful in light of there are more and more bivocational ministers and more people in the congregation are rising up into leadership roles. And so seminaries should be the places where we fill this gap of needed education at a variety of levels so that we're actually fulfilling the needs of the church and helping all of those who are feeling called but do not feel equipped. And so how can Wesley or other seminaries step into that role? I think it's a needed role, and we're playing around and learning things as we go. But yet it's a lot of fun to think about how you're fulfilling at this particular time the needs of the church.
That's great. I love that, Carla. Thank you for sharing that. David, how would you add on to that?
I think I'd go back a ways to when I was a seminary and when we were first talking about something that would become the leadership center. And in those days, if you use the word leadership, you were talking about a set of skills and insights that weren't necessarily being taught in seminary.
Sure.
And so in those days, when I'd visit a pastor's study, I'd see their seminary textbooks on one shelf, but the shelf that was at eye level had a growing number of books on seminary administration, seminary leadership. And it was as if seminary education was good, but then you needed some skills and insights that one called practical in order to help your church grow and thrive. I think what's changed, part of the change is because of Wesleyan leadership. We established a leadership center as something critical to the task of theological application itself. But for a long time, I think we had in mind that somehow we were going to help churches get back to where they once belonged.
Oh, interesting.
Get back to where they were sometime in the vague period of the late 50s. How do you fix this? How do you fix that? You need more space for your nursery school. You needed your worship time at a different time. And the conventional wisdom then is that the leadership involved getting back to where we once belonged. Now it's more forward-thinking, and we're seeking to be more thoughtful about what God would have us, what theological about church leadership. I liken our period to the flow of a river coming out of a high mountain. And as it gets down more to the flatland, a deep stream becomes a delta region. And you don't know which one of those streams makes its way to the ocean. And I think we're in that period now, and necessarily.
I wonder if we could turn this question, because Jonathan, you're coming to this position from a space in judicatory leadership. So what is your hope for church leadership as you step into this new goal?
Well, so to offer some context to that, I'm coming from a United Methodist by background, and have served in a role that's akin to a director of connectional ministries, which is a position that's codified within the United Methodist Book of Discipline, and what that position does in many ways is in its title. It's about connecting people, and really. I'm interested in this space with the Lewis Center to think about how are we connecting people to the resources they need, but also how are we connecting people to one another. To me, that is the real emerging trend in church leadership that I see. And one of the things that's a real base of importance for the Lewis Center, for Wesley, for all of us who are invested in this conversation is really to imagine how are we laboring together for outcomes that we are feeling called by God to pursue? I wrote in my first article for Leading Ideas about the trend in the cinematic universe in the early part of this century was to have individual superhero movie. And so you'd have Spider-Man and Batman and Superman and Wonder Woman and all these great characters who were sort of these solo heroic kind of figures. And then after about a decade and a half, you started to see more and more groups of superheroes working on bigger issues together. So you would see the Avengers or Justice League or Guardians of the Galaxy. And it's not that everything that we do in the church is about being a superhero, but I think it's an interesting analogy for where we're headed as the church, which is that the problems that we're being asked to address, the ways that we're being asked to live in the world are a little bit bigger and more complex than we can handle independently. And so the more that we can live in connection together and see our fellow leaders not as competitors, but as collaborators, I think there's some real opportunity there. That does require us to sacrifice some of our former ways of doing things. I think I've read a lot of Ron Heifetz's stuff over the years, and Jim Collins and some of those great business-minded leaders, and there's so much wisdom that's there. But when we're operating from a business-oriented perspective, that is naturally competitive. It's naturally about there can be only one winner and everybody else is a loser. And I think part of the vision of the kingdom of heaven is that we all win when we're together in the love of God. And so to me, I think there's some real opportunity to lean in on that nature of collaboration and togetherness. But I don't think that's any one person's responsibility. I think that's going to require shifts in our mentality amongst clergy. I think it's going to require shifts in mentality amongst laity. even judicatories. When we think about, I don't know how many pastors who are going to listen to the or lay people will think about sort of year-end statistics that you're asked to gather. There's a lot of bean counting that we do in that. That's really about, can I prove my worth to somebody who is employing me? And Carla, your comment about bivocationalism, I think we're going to continue to see trends of folk who are doing ministry and other things. And what we really, I hope, will grow to value is how people are being transformed more than how many people are in a particular chair or how many dollars are coming in. And so that's going to require the evolution too. And so I think there are a number of pieces that might end up lining up with some of those spaces for church leadership and kind of bringing that from the judicatory space into the seminary space.
And I think it might end up being, I think it really is a both and. Sometimes the challenge in front of a pastoral leader is just how to do things well.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's how do we do the right things? And I see both issues at play simultaneously. So we're needing to be both managers and leaders in our spaces, asking what kind of problem is this and what's the right way to solve it. So I've been really glad that you come to the Leadership Center because I think I told you my analogy is a great hardware store here in Washington, Stroh-Snyder's. Yeah, so you go to the Stroh-Snyder's hardware store and they have everything. More importantly, they have people in there who know where everything is, right, and know how to help you figure out how to do what you need to do. I think what wouldn't work is if we say, here's the one thing that's going to lead up the church revitalization. Instead, we're out there in a way kind of exploring and sharing the things we're finding to help us through this Delta region.
Well, and and so much of that becomes more of a grassroots movement. It's a bottom up, being able to say what are best practices, how are things emerging from within that maybe it will be applied in other settings rather than kind of our trend historically has been, let's do a top down. Here's what you have to do to go and collect $200. And what I think we're seeing in this adaptive challenge space is the way that we've always done things isn't the way that we may do them moving forward. And so often, I think recently was working with a local congregation on a values-based discernment exercise. And one of the things that struck me is distinguishing between our core values and our accidental values. So core values are the things that are inherent to an organization, no matter what. They will always be a part of your DNA and who you are. Accidental values are the things that you do because you've always done them. And I think in a lot of the space of church leadership today is helping to really distinguish those two pieces, because our activity can't just be rooted in our tradition. It has to be rooted in our purpose. And that discernment for leaders is going to be incredibly important, and doing that, as you said, David, in ways that reflect a non-binary approach, that look at the multiplicity of outcomes.
Carla, I think behind me on my book of leadership, my list of leadership books, are books that say lead like Jesus or read like Moses. I have not found that approach to the connection between leadership and the Bible to be the best way to think about this. What is the way that you're disciplined?
Does it.
Yeah.
Because I'm a Paul scholar by training. And so I confession, and don't write in and ask about this, but I am writing a tongue-in-cheek reflection on leadership that I'm calling Failing Like Paul. Because if Paul were to write charge conference reports for his churches, okay, we tend to think about Paul, put Paul on a pedestal. I mean, Paul has written so much of our New Testament, but these churches, they're small, a dozen or more, and they're famous for fighting. And so, you would not necessarily, by our standards today, think that Paul was a smashing success. And yet, Paul's ministry of seeing where God was at work in surprising ways led to groups of people who came together who had no place nor voice. Really didn't matter in their larger society, but they mattered in the church. So you talked earlier about coming together. Paul talks so much about the body of Christ. And there's so much power in those communities. The Spirit is at work. But I don't know that any of our church leadership material would actually point to some of Paul's churches if we could dissect them and say that was a smashing success. Instead, God still works in spite of us. I get to, as a Paul scholar, reflect on, maybe these leadership practices don't look very successful, but what if that's just the topsy-turvy kingdom of God at work? That God takes what we think is really weak or ineffective and does something beyond any of our imaginations. Because that certainly happened with Paul's churches.
It's amazing. Yeah, and I think if I can interject my own story into this, when we started talking about me coming on as the Lewis Center director, I think in a conversation with you, David, I said, hey, if you want just sort of the well-known, the published, the fancy person, I'm probably not your guy, right? I don't have, I'm not a published author, don't have a wide history of teaching seminary level courses or anything like that. What I do have is a passion for the church and a passion for leadership. I was fortunate to study organizational change and leadership at the University of Southern California and get a doctorate of education in that. And a lot of that work in the dissertation was really looking at a problem of practice around the decline of recruitment of people of color to the clergy role in the United Methodist Church, and seeing the role of mentoring in that. It's great to think about Paul. When I think about Paul as a leader, I think about Paul was a mentor to so many people, and just what creates legacy and what creates outcome and that sort of thing. And that's a part of a lean in this season of not only church leadership, but the church is to be able to look in all places for where God's people are showing up, not only in buildings or in pews, not only in Sunday school classrooms, but being able to look in communities, being able to look to the margins to see those different spaces. I'm curious, especially for you, David. You've been the president of the school as long as the Lewis Center has existed. How have you seen just the evolution of you spoke to this a little bit earlier of church leadership, but really, where do you see that moving forward from this place?
I think one thing is a helpful lack of certainty about what should happen. Also, more of an examination of what the real cause and effect are that leads to congregational vitality. We focus too much on I think the lagging indicators.
Amen.
Right?
Yeah.
Rather than the leading indicators.
That's exactly right.
I know in the work of getting new members, my wife, Dreamer McAllister Olson, which is fabulous at bringing new people into the church. And somebody asked, well, what's the key to it? Well, one key was she was just rabid about going through those membership cards in the pews. I don't even think those cards are in the pews anymore, but in those days they were, yeah. And she'd come home on a Sunday afternoon and go through the cards, find somebody who's new, check it against the membership rolls. You think, well, that's the key. Yeah, the real key was she just connected with people. That was the key.
Sure.
But you also needed a way to keep track of that. Sure. And I think there's a growing awareness of the messiness, that there's no single answer. And you look for what God is doing and then work harder and work smarter.
Absolutely. I was had a conversation recently with Love at Queen about this very exactly what you're describing, and what he said is, it's one thing for a pastor to go to a person, and especially a younger person, and say, why haven't you become a member yet? Well, we'll say, because I don't want to be a member of anything. But if you go and say, hey, I notice you are showing up for worship, or you're there to serve folks, or you're in a discipling space, what's motivating you to do that? What's at the core of who you are? And then being able to create space for invitation that goes beyond sort of our categorical norms and seeks to meet people where they are. there's some real wisdom in that, I think, just in how we are training and educating future leaders not to, my wife's a school teacher, and she will talk often about having to meet sort of standards of learning or things that are assigned, again, kind of that top down, this is how you will know you have learned the subject matter. And sometimes that is true. And other times we find that the way people learn is a little bit different. And I think the same is true for how we come to faith and what we see in the church. And I imagine that's part of what we see in the student body here at Wesley. Carl.
It's a journey.
Right.
So I would like to think about what your priorities might be moving forward. You've talked about connectivity, of helping folks think more in a team mindset. Sure. I wonder, you can only do so much. What would be your priorities moving forward?
Sure. So I think right off the bat, a couple of things. From the moment I found out I was going to have this opportunity, what I've grown to understand is that the Lewis Center is really known for delivering strategic, actionable insights to leaders, to congregations, to communities throughout the world. And so continuing to find ways to deliver strategic, actionable insights is a really important priority. I think this space is one of those pieces, making sure that our Leading Ideas newsletter, our Leading Ideas Talks podcast reflect the cutting edge of where we are in church leadership and have a frequency and consistency and reliability to offer those deliverables, and figuring out ways that we can do that maybe in other forms as well. We're living into a space where our consumption of media is various. And so I'm excited to imagine the ways that the Lewis Center will be partnering with the seminary on things like, for example, our Pathways program and some of the other deliverables that we have to make sure that people are equipped with resources they need to lead well. That to me is the number one priority. I think some areas of interest related to that work, Carla, we talked loosely about how is it that we measure vitality in churches. This is a little bit of work that I've been doing in my current role, my sort of current role in the judicatory space, is thinking about metrics and measurements that can better reflect what vitality looks like in church today. I love what you said, David, about the leading measures versus lagging measures. I think another way of saying that idea is moving from transactional sorts of measurements to transformational forms of measurements. And so how could we at the Lewis Center be a part of helping to shape that conversation around what that can look like? And that's happened for me within the United Methodist family, but I imagine that churches of all different sorts are really interested in thinking about this. I'm really interested to think about my experience of what we've defined as church leadership excellence, especially in the last 20 years, has been relatively Anglo-centric. I'm really interested to inquire upon how we can look to a wide variety of traditions and perspectives to understand church leadership from a wide variety of lenses, because I think so much of church leadership is intersectional. It's about the intersections of different positionalities we hold, like race and gender, orientation, socioeconomic status, political perspective, educational background. And the truth is, like we've talked about already, Carla, you highlighted so well, the church is often led by the least expected folks. And so how can we look outside of what our normative lenses have been to really see the possibilities of church leadership? And then the last thing I would say is that idea of community-based leadership, that the connection that we live into in leadership is not only within the church, but it's within community partnerships as well. And so how do we foster and form community-based leadership principles and partnerships that still hold to the value of the Christian tradition and still hold to the value of the unique nature of the church, but are intentionally lived out in a wider and broader capacity, both as a mercy and justice kind of tool, but also as an evangelistic tool to say there are plenty of voices in the world today who offer a lens of what it means to be a Christian. And so I think that's a part of being a witness as a leader, is being able to model a form of Christian leadership that is more in line with the gospel and more in line with the life and ministry of Jesus. And so the more that we can be pushing toward that, the better.
Sounds very Pauline as well.
Maybe. Does that mean I might fit in the seminary? That'd be good. Everything sounds Pauline to Carla.
Well, not everything.
Not every, but a lot of things. Well, this all has sounded really great to just be able to be in conversation together and have a few minutes. And I want to thank all of you who have been willing to give of your time to check out this podcast. And I want to let you know that there are more resources for you as a leader at churchleadership.com. I'd invite you to visit that website to find leading ideas, resources, more of these podcasts, and other ways that you can connect and be involved. And I'd also encourage you to check out wesleyseminary.edu. There are a wonderful number of resources through the seminary that are there for your engagement and use. And maybe this is a part of a nudge to you being called to something deeper, something engaging theological education. And we'd love to be in that conversation with you at Wesley Theological Seminary. So anytime I have a conversation with a person or group of people, I like to say, do you have a last word or phrase that you want to leave people with? So let me ask that of the two of you. Any last word or phrase that you want to leave both with?
I would say God is still doing a lot of new things, and you will be surprised by where you see the Spirit on the loose. So I follow that Spirit wherever it leads.
And I'd say rather than us think about how we're going to turn the church around, I'm so tired of that phrase. We're not going to turn the church around. We're going to turn it towards the future and invite you all not just to be consumers of the Leadership Center, but contributors to what we're trying to do at this institution.
Amen. That is a good way for us to end. So thank you so much, friends. Enjoy the day, and we'll look forward to engaging with you again soon through the Leading Ideas podcast or through Leading Ideas newsletter, the work of Wesley Theological Seminary. Enjoy the day.
Thanks for joining us for Leading Ideas Talks. Please like and subscribe to this channel and click the bell icon to get updates for new videos.